The morning fog draped over the small town of Green Hollow like a heavy blanket, muffling the sounds of life that would normally fill the streets. At the edge of town, the town had promised him peace, but it had only served to remind him of the case he could never forget. The case that broke him. 2 decades ago, Elijah had walked away from the FBI with his head held high, but the guilt of an unsolved case had haunted him every day since. The disappearance of a young girl, Mia Turner. An investigation that had spiraled out of control, slipping through his fingers like sand. Key witnesses had disappeared. Evidence had been tampered with. And the man they had suspected, an influential businessman, had walked free. Elijah had failed her, and yet here he was in this tiny town, alone with his thoughts. The silence was supposed to be comforting, but only amplified his failures. Then a bark. It was unlike any other sound in the sleepy town of Green Hollow. Desperate, urgent. Elijah froze, his heart racing. He had learned to trust his instincts during his time in law enforcement, and every one of them was screaming that this wasn't just any dog. He turned, his eyes scanning the mist that enveloped his front yard. Out of the fog emerged a German shepherd, its coat matted with dirt and leaves. Its amber eyes locked onto his with an intelligence that sent a chill down his spine. The dog barked again, louder this time, and Elijah felt a strange pull in his chest. He set his coffee down, every instinct telling him that this moment would change everything. The dog didn't run off like most strays. It lingered, staring at him with a purpose, then took a few steps toward the woods. It looked back, waiting for Elijah to follow. And for the first time in years, Elijah's old investigative instincts flared up, the fog of regret and resignation lifting from his mind. This wasn't a random encounter. Elijah was certain of it. The dog's determined gaze held a message, one he couldn't quite decipher, but one he knew he had to follow. With a heavy sigh, he stood up, brushing the dirt off his worn jeans. The old, familiar thrill of the hunt flooded his veins as he walked toward the woods, the dog leading the way. Elijah followed the dog through the thick woods. Each step weighed with the mystery of the moment. His eyes flicked nervously from one shadow to the next, expecting something, anything, that might explain the dog's unusual behavior. The German shepherd's movements were swift and purposeful, leading him deeper into the forest, past towering oaks and tangled underbrush. It was as if the dog knew exactly where it was going, and Elijah was merely a passenger, caught in the wake of its silent resolve. The morning mist hung thick between the trees, distorting the world around him, but the dog remained unfazed, its eyes fixed ahead, unwavering. Elijah couldn't help but feel that this was no coincidence. After all, what were the odds that a retired FBI agent, broken by a case that never seemed to end, would cross paths with a dog who seemed to carry more secrets than anyone Elijah had ever known? As the dog led him further, Elijah's thoughts began to drift back to the past, to Mia Turner, to the case that had haunted him for years. He had thought that walking away from it all would bring peace, but instead, it had only intensified the noise in his mind. The guilt, the feeling that justice was a game of chess where the pieces moved without his control. But now, as he trudged deeper into the woods, he felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe this dog, this strange encounter, was the key to something larger. Maybe it could bring the redemption he had longed for, something, anything, to ease the weight that crushed him every day. After what felt like an eternity, the dog stopped at the edge of a clearing. Elijah stood still, watching the animal as it circled, its tail stiff with tension. Something wasn't right. He had learned to read the signs, even in retirement. There was danger ahead. Stay here, Elijah murmured to the dog, as though it would understand. He crouched low, moving with the silence of someone who had spent too many years in the shadows. The clearing was small, but the air felt heavy, thick with something unnatural. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the area. At first, he saw nothing out of the ordinary, but then his gaze fell upon a small, crumpled figure lying on the ground in the center of the clearing. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the figure, Sarah Miller, a local environmental researcher. Her body was motionless, her blonde hair spread out around her, but to his relief, she was still breathing. Before Elijah could move, the dog let out a low growl, its eyes now locked onto a figure in the shadows. Elijah's heart raced. He recognized the man immediately. The last person he wanted to see, Robert Maxwell, the man who had evaded justice for far too long, and whose connections had once pulled the strings behind Mia Turner's disappearance. Maxwell stood just beyond the trees, watching them. His cold eyes gleamed with familiarity and disdain. Elijah froze, every muscle in his body tense. He knew this confrontation was inevitable. But the question remained. How had Maxwell found Sarah? How had he known she would be here? Maxwell's lips curled into a smug smile, one that seemed to say everything Elijah needed to know. You really thought you could escape this, Elijah? Maxwell's voice was low, almost mocking. You think this dog, this mutt, will save you? It's too late. You're too late. But Elijah wasn't scared. Not anymore. Not with Sarah's life hanging in the balance. He had been a fool for too long, letting guilt and fear control him. He wasn't going to let Maxwell win this time. Elijah's eyes flicked to the German shepherd, who was now standing perfectly still, watching Maxwell with a focus that was nothing short of calculated. He'd seen it before, trained K-9 units, capable of detecting the smallest shifts in a person's energy, their intentions. This dog was more than just an animal. It was a partner, and together they were going to end this. With a steadying breath, Elijah stood tall. I'm not running from you anymore, Maxwell, he said, his voice clear and strong. You can't bury the truth. Not this time. The tension in the air was palpable, every second stretching longer than the last. Elijah's eyes never left Maxwell, the man who had haunted his nightmares for years. The German shepherd stood between them, a silent but powerful barrier. Maxwell's gaze flickered from the dog to Elijah, his smug expression turning to one of thinly veiled frustration. You think this dog can stop me? Maxwell sneered, his hands slowly flexing at his sides, as if preparing to strike. You've lost, Elijah. This town is mine. These people are mine. And your little investigation? It's over. Elijah's grip tightened on the worn handle of the flashlight in his hand. He had been down this road before, alone, outnumbered and outgunned. But this time, it was different. This time, he wasn't just fighting for justice. He was fighting for redemption, for something larger than himself. This ends today, Elijah said firmly, his voice steady, though his pulse raced. He didn't look at Maxwell anymore. His focus was on the dog, the unshakable creature that stood as his ally in this moment of chaos. The German shepherd, hero as Elijah had come to think of him, moved with calculated precision. The dog's body was taut with readiness, its amber eyes fixed not on Maxwell, but on the patterns of movement in the surrounding forest. Elijah could feel the shift in the air as Hero began to circle, staying low, preparing to act. Maxwell took a step forward, his arrogance apparent in the way he moved. You really think anyone's going to believe you? You think I'll buy your story about me? He hissed. You're just a washed-up agent, living in a fantasy world. The truth is, they'll believe whatever I tell them. I hold the power here. Not you. But Elijah wasn't intimidated. He had faced worse than this. He had fought for justice in places far more dangerous than this sleepy town. He had known corruption. He had seen it firsthand. And now, standing with Hero by his side, the only thing that mattered was seeing this through to the end. Then, as if to prove Elijah's point, Hero let out a sharp bark, signaling the start of their final confrontation. Without hesitation, the dog lunged toward Maxwell, its movements swift and precise. Maxwell stumbled backward, eyes wide with shock, as the dog's teeth sank into the sleeve of his jacket, pinning him in place. "You think this is over?" Maxwell spat, struggling against the dog's hold. His composure faltered, but his pride was unbroken. "You're too late." Elijah moved in, his hand reaching into his coat pocket, fingers brushing against the small, concealed piece of evidence he'd kept hidden for years, the key to unraveling Maxwell's empire. He didn't have to say a word. The dog knew what was needed. Hero shifted, keeping Maxwell occupied, while Elijah carefully moved behind him, his every step deliberate, as though this had been a plan in the making for a long time. The moment felt like it lasted an eternity, the forest around them standing still, holding its breath. For years, Elijah had been chasing ghosts, unsolved cases, dead ends, and lost opportunities. But now, with Hero's unwavering presence, with Sarah's courage, and with the truth finally within his reach, Elijah knew that this was his moment of redemption. Maxwell was cornered, his back to the cold tree trunk. "You won't get away with this," he growled, his voice shaky now, no longer the confident EO he had been when he'd first walked into this town. His eyes darted between Elijah and the dog, realizing, perhaps for the first time, that the power was no longer in his hands. "You're wrong," Elijah said, his voice calm, yet filled with the weight of a man who had waited far too long for this moment. "The truth is stronger than your lies, Maxwell. You'll face justice, and this time you won't escape." With a final tug of his hand, Elijah revealed the folder, evidence that had been painstakingly gathered over the years, a culmination of every lead, every piece of truth, and every sacrifice. The evidence was damning, undeniable. Maxwell's empire of corruption, his manipulation of the town, and his dirty dealings. Everything was there. And this time, there would be no escaping it. Maxwell's face twisted in disbelief as Elijah held up the folder. "This is over, Maxwell," Elijah said, his words final, his resolve unwavering. "You can't run anymore. You can't hide." Maxwell's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. He had underestimated the power of truth, the determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. And in that moment, standing before Elijah, he understood just how wrong he had been. Hero released his grip on Maxwell's sleeve and moved to stand by Elijah's side once again, the dog's body still and alert. Elijah reached down to give Hero a pat on the head, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had been saved by this dog, this incredible animal who had been more than just a protector. Hero had been a partner, a companion, and now, a symbol of the justice that had long eluded Elijah. As the sound of sirens grew nearer, Elijah felt a sense of peace wash over him. The town of Green Hollow would never be the same, and neither would he. The past, with all its regrets and guilt, was finally behind him. But the future, his future, was just beginning. The morning after Maxwell's capture, Green Hollow began to stir with an energy that hadn't been felt in years. People whispered in hushed tones, exchanging theories and rumors about what had transpired the night before. Yet, amidst the town's commotion, Elijah sat at the small kitchen table in his home, a place that had once been a sanctuary. Now the scene of a victory he hadn't fully processed. Hero lay quietly at his feet, the dog's steady breathing filling the silence. Elijah ran a hand over his face. the weariness of the past few days crashing over him. It wasn't over, not yet. The fight for justice had only just begun. Maxwell's arrest was just the first domino to fall. But Elijah knew better than anyone that a network like Maxwell's didn't fall easily. There were still threats to confront, still a web of corruption to unravel. And there was still the matter of Sarah. The young environmental researcher had been through more than anyone should have to endure in a lifetime, and yet she stood strong. Elijah had watched as she sifted through the evidence, piecing together the puzzle her mother, Catherine Mitchell, had started years ago. It was clear now that Catherine's death wasn't an accident. It had been orchestrated to silence her. But as Elijah had learned all too well, the truth always has a way of finding its voice. Elijah felt a familiar tug in his chest as he glanced at Sarah's house, just a few miles down the road. He had promised to stay by her side. He had promised that her mother's work, her legacy, wouldn't be lost. But each promise was a weight, and Elijah could feel the pull of his past, the fear of failure rising within him. He couldn't lose Sarah too. "I'll see this through," he whispered to himself, as if saying it aloud could somehow make it more real. "For Catherine, for Mia, and for you." He stood up, the creaking of the floorboards beneath his feet snapping him back to the present. Hero's head lifted, his intelligent eyes locking onto Elijah's. Without a word, the dog stood and trotted toward the door, as though urging Elijah forward, reminding him of the purpose that had brought them here. The days stretched ahead of him, filled with meetings, briefings, and plans. Elijah couldn't afford to lose sight of their goal. Maxwell's influence didn't end with his arrest. The town was still reeling, still torn between those who had benefited from Maxwell's wealth and those whose lives had been destroyed by it. The truth had surfaced, but it had yet to fully penetrate the walls of denial built by decades of corporate power. As Elijah made his way to Sarah's house, he found her sitting in the small, cluttered office where she had spent countless hours uncovering the truth her mother had died trying to expose. She looked up as he entered, her face tired but determined. Her mother's journals lay scattered across the desk, pages filled with meticulous notes, evidence, and names. Elijah could see the weight of it all on her shoulders, but she didn't let it show. "Good morning," Sarah said softly, her voice still hoarse from the emotional exhaustion of the past few days. "I was just reviewing some of the last files my mom left behind. There's still so much we need to piece together." Elijah nodded, pulling up a chair across from her. "You're not alone in this. We'll finish it together." Sarah gave him a small smile, though there was a quiet sadness in her eyes. She had lost everything: her mother, her peace of mind, her security, but what she had found in the process was something far greater. She had found the truth, and it was worth the fight. "Do you think we can actually stop him?" she asked, the question hanging in the air between them. Elijah didn't hesitate. "We will. Maxwell may have had the power, but we have something he can't control: the truth." The truth had a way of breaking things down, of exposing the darkest corners of the world. And Elijah had seen enough to know that no amount of money or influence could hold back a story that was meant to be told. He had spent years in the shadows, but now the light was breaking through. As they continued to sift through Catherine's work, a sense of urgency settled over them both. They had come too far to stop now. Elijah could feel the walls of the town closing in, but this time, he wouldn't let the truth be buried again. The revelations they had uncovered were just the beginning of the storm that would sweep through Green Hollow, and they had to be ready. Elijah stood, glancing at Hero, who had moved to the window, watching the world outside with quiet vigilance. The dog had been his partner in this fight, the silent protector, and the one constant through it all. Hero's loyalty had never wavered, and Elijah knew that no matter what came next, the dog would be by his side. "I'll be back later," Elijah said, his voice firm as he glanced at Sarah. "We've got a lot of work to do." As he turned to leave, Hero followed him to the door. The dog's presence was a reminder of the promises they had made, of the lives they had vowed to protect. Elijah wasn't walking this path alone. Not anymore. The days following Maxwell's arrest had been a whirlwind, and yet, for Elijah, it all felt like a slow-moving storm. The air in Green Hollow was heavy with anticipation, a town on the brink of transformation. As Elijah stood in the center of the small town square, he could feel the tension in the streets. The truth had been exposed, but the real battle was just beginning. It wasn't just about taking down a corrupt businessman anymore. It was about reclaiming the town's soul. Maxwell's empire had been built on lies, manipulation, and fear, but now that foundation was crumbling. People were starting to talk. Whispers of environmental violations, corporate corruption, and the devastating impact Maxwell had had on the town's water supply spread like wildfire. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Elijah met with Sarah outside the courthouse, where the final hearing for Maxwell's criminal charges would take place. The weight of the moment was palpable, but Sarah's determination kept him grounded. Hero, as always, stood by their side, the dog's watchful eyes scanning their surroundings with the same steady calm he had shown since their journey began. "Are you ready for this?" Elijah asked, his voice low but steady. Sarah took a deep breath, nodding. "I don't think there's ever a point where you're ready for something like this. But I've come too far to back down now. We have to see this through." Her words hit Elijah harder than he expected. He had spent his entire career chasing justice, but it wasn't until he met Sarah and Hero that he understood what it truly meant to fight for the truth. "No matter the cost. Together, we'll finish what your mother started," Elijah said firmly. He gave Sarah a reassuring smile, though he knew they were about to face their toughest challenge yet. The courtroom was filled with tension as the trial began. Maxwell, still in his usual sharp suit, sat at the defense table, his eyes scanning the room with that familiar arrogance. But this time, his facade was cracked. His empire was falling apart, and nothing he did could stop it. The documents they had collected, photos, water samples, financial records, everything was laid bare for the world to see. No more hiding, no more lies. The courtroom doors opened, and the room fell silent as Sarah walked in, head held high. She was flanked by Elijah, who kept a protective hand on her shoulder, and Hero, who trotted beside them, his eyes unwavering. There was no turning back now. Elijah watched Maxwell's face as Sarah took her seat in the witness stand. The man's smug expression faltered, just for a moment. His hand trembled as he adjusted his cufflinks. But he quickly regained his composure. Elijah knew that Maxwell feared Sarah more than he cared to admit. She was the last person he wanted to face, his worst nightmare come to life. The trial unfolded with shocking clarity, as Sarah recounted her mother's investigation and the web of corruption that had surrounded Maxwell for years. She spoke with calm precision, detailing the evidence and the lengths to which Maxwell had gone to silence her mother. But it was her final statement that shook the room to its core. "I spent 5 years believing my mother was dead," Sarah said, her voice unwavering as she looked directly at Maxwell. "But I now know that she died for a reason. She died to expose you. She died to protect me. And now I will finish what she started." Maxwell's face twisted in rage, but he knew it was over. The walls were closing in, and there was nowhere left to hide. The evidence was irrefutable, and the people of Green Hollow were starting to demand accountability. As the trial came to a close, Elijah felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The years of guilt, The years of feeling like a failure were finally fading into the background. The truth had been revealed, and it was powerful enough to bring down even the most entrenched corruption. Maxwell's conviction was inevitable. As the gavel slammed down, Elijah let out a slow breath. It was over, but as he turned to Sarah, he realized that the true victory was not in the courtroom. It was in the quiet moments that followed, the healing that had begun, the lives that were being rebuilt, and the community that was finally waking up. Hero, sensing the shift, nudged his head against Elijah's hand. The dog had been more than a companion. He had been a symbol of hope, loyalty, and the unwavering power of truth. He had led them through the darkest moments. And now, as the sun began to set over Green Hollow, Elijah knew that their journey was far from over. "We did it, Hero," Elijah whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it." Sarah smiled beside him, a tear slipping down her cheek as she reached down to stroke Hero's head. The dog responded with a soft nudge, as if to remind them that, though the battle had been won, the fight for a better future was just beginning. As the federal agents began to move in on Maxwell, the town of Green Hollow started to change. People gathered in the streets, their faces filled with relief, hope, and determination. Elijah knew that this was only the beginning of their healing process. The scars of the past would take time to fade. But with Hero by their side, with the truth finally out in the open, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. The journey had been long and filled with pain, but the truth had set them free. And as the last of the federal agents loaded Maxwell into a van, Elijah turned to Sarah and Hero, his heart swelling with gratitude. They had fought together, and together they had won. In this story, we witnessed how loyalty, courage, and perseverance can change the course of not only one person's life, but an entire community. Elijah, Sarah, and Hero showed us that no matter how dark the road may seem, the truth always finds its way to the light. It's a reminder that no matter what obstacles we face, with faith in each other and in the right cause, we can overcome even the greatest of challenges. What did you think of the story? Let us know your thoughts and feelings in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the HeartForce channel for more inspiring stories about change, healing, and the incredible bond between dogs and their people.